Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and before I try and summarise the destruction that Theresa May has brought upon herself and the Brexit process, I couldn't pass over a comment she made on Twitter where she said, "My thoughts are with the family, friends and loved ones of all those affected by terrible events in Westminster 2 years ago today." All right, fine. But then, "We will never bow to those who seek to spread hate and fear and try to divide us." But that is a bit rich coming from someone who has been attempting to divide us, turning MPs against each other and the electorate against Parliament. I do hope it does fail, and fails hard, but if it does, it'll be no thanks to her. But anyway, on to more immediate events. And yesterday, Theresa May went to Brussels in order to ask for an extension to Article 50 lasting until June the 30th. Because we're not in a position to make an orderly exit from the EU, and make no mistake, this is not simply due to her spectacular failure in getting a withdrawal agreement through Parliament. In order to leave the EU, we need to unpick many of our laws and make sure they're on our statute books as laws for an independent UK. Without this, those laws would cease to apply on March the 30th. But surely this was done some time ago. The Brexiteers said that everything about leaving would be easy. Well, who'd have thought it? The people that have never governed, never taken part in international negotiations, turns out they didn't know what they were talking about. 2 years later, and there are still piles of laws that haven't made it through Parliament yet. Some accuse the House of Lords of slowing down the process to make Brexit impossible, but the fact is that many of these laws and statutory instruments haven't even made it to the Lords yet, let alone through it. Another thing the Brexiteers said is that we'd have the EU over a barrel, that we hold all the cards. The threat of no deal will make them crack. But yesterday, Theresa May talked and answered for 90 minutes. People attending were later reported to have said that she said nothing at all. She had no plan B and gave no justification even for thinking that plan A could even be achieved. She then had to leave the room while the rest of the council spent hours debating what should be done to protect the UK from itself. The threat of no deal is looming large over this process, made more real by a clueless Prime Minister with no plan at all. An extra 2-week extension is not going to remove that on its own, and yet this threat of no deal hasn't delivered the EU cracks that were promised. The only thing breaking is the UK. Every single assertion made by the Brexiteers has been proven to be magnificently incorrect. In fact, yesterday showed us something else for those that still needed convincing. It showed us exactly how every international negotiation from Brexit onwards will go. We will ask for something, will then be denied and offered something much less than what we wanted, and will be forced to take it. Note that we didn't get our extension of June the 30th, but there's no discussion today about demanding it. Nobody is surprised that we didn't get what we wanted. Nobody expected to. And this is the future for certain. Remember, the EU are the ones, according to the Brexiteers, who have the most to lose from no deal. They are the ones who need the UK more than anyone else in the world. Well, if the people who need us most refuse us, just what are those who don't need us as much going to do? Well, we know that too, because most have already told us to sod off. That's why they haven't signed those trade agreements yet. We've had a few countries do it. The vast majority of our trade with countries, those countries have said no. And that's because we're asking for the same terms. They know that we will accept worse terms. If Theresa May is allowed to keep running the show as she has been up until this point, then she's going to put her deal up for another vote next week. The Speaker, I am sure, will find some way to allow her to do it, out of pity if nothing else. Parliament will vote it down again. Even Number 10 apparently is reported as saying today that they don't expect it to pass. They will amend the Withdrawal Act to change the exit date from March the 29th to April the 12th. But then what's the Prime Minister going to do? With Parliament waiting expectantly for her next idea on how to manage Brexit, what would her even most ardent supporter have expected her to say? Now, the reports today suggesting that they are planning 7 indicative votes for a solution. But this is coming very late, and it's not clear that she still won't try to frustrate that process, as she has in the past. Even if she does allow Parliament to finally debate and vote on alternatives, the problem with having 7 such votes is not so much the suggestion that they may not be realistic. That's neither here nor there. It's that it might mean that there's no overall majority for any one of them at the first time of asking. Remember, the one that we eventually want to go for could be everyone's second choice, but no one's first choice. We should have been doing this some time ago, followed by more debates and then whittling them down to finally get into the one that had the compromise, the majority of support. This should have happened after the withdrawal agreement was voted down badly for the first time in January. In fact, the vote should have taken place in December, and then we'd have had 3 months for Parliament to find an alternative. And Parliament has been arguing to be allowed to do this for all this time. But Theresa May has blocked it. Whenever someone brought a motion to do just this, she whipped her MPs to vote against it. She then had the nerve to blame Parliament for not voting for an alternative, a position happily supported by the right-wing media who want Parliament to be plunged into chaos. Disaster capitalists don't profit in calm, ordered times. Now she's finally allowing the votes, allegedly, and giving her MPs a free vote, but with an exceedingly short time left to narrow them down to a single course of action. No doubt when none of them receive a majority on the first round, she'll point the finger again and say that they don't agree on anything. My fervent hope is that MPs properly talk to each other before the votes and get behind one. Unfortunately, this would also need Jeremy Corbyn to stop playing party politics as well. Fat chance. The ERG will keep the pressure on her to do nothing, or they'll split the party. The same paralysis that's prevented her acting for the national good up to now will keep a tight hold on her. Parliament knows that. I saw reports of Conservative MPs yesterday saying they'd finally had enough of her and are getting ready to demand that she go. We'll see what happens with that. Yes, she's bulletproof from leadership challenges until December, thanks to Jacob Rees-Mogg's miscalculation earlier last year. However, they can still get her to stand down if telling her that any other course of action would bring down the government, and if ministers resign wholesale, that's what it would do. Remember, throughout all this, one thing I do believe about her is she's loyal to her party. She wouldn't want to see her party destroyed over this. She's just not loyal to anything else. But would a leadership contest really help matters? I mean, yes, Theresa May is completely out of her depth and too weak to face down challenges to her leadership. Ministerial collective responsibility has not been in operation since day one. This is the concept, it's what we call in British politics, that ministers back up the leader's position. They have their little arguments in private, but as far as the public are concerned, they are all united. If a minister didn't like it, they resigned. I can't remember the last time this collective responsibility was actually in operation. So although Theresa May has no control, would anyone else actually improve the situation? Maybe another choice of leader could have, but MPs have the taste for defying the leadership now, and there are no candidates that seem to have the strength to turn back the tide. Despite the numbers still wouldn't add up for a deal that didn't attract cross-party support. The DUP still aren't going for it. The ERG don't want a deal. A general election might shake things up, but polls suggest that not much would change, really. The problem is that both the Conservatives and the Labour manifestos still talk about a Brexit deal. Labour is still behind the Conservatives in the polls, which is baffling. It was embarrassing enough to lose a general election to a Conservative government that's tripled our national debt in just a few years, reaching almost unsustainable levels of over 85% of our GDP, and still continuing to squeeze investment and public services. But to still not look like a better prospect for the country after the shambles of the Tory-led Brexit is so far incomprehensible. So I don't believe that a general election would solve anything, even though obviously as a supporter of an opposition party, I should be all up for it. Though it does seem that the EU would be open to a long extension for that purpose, maybe, but it just sounds messy. But a long extension comes with it a demand to contest European elections. There were ideas suggested last year as to how we could stay in the EU without contesting those elections. They were considered fine, but the EU have decided to take an extreme view of the law on this in order to avoid court cases causing them even more headaches. It may well be that they'd win them, but they can do without the hassle. Another example of how the EU have hardened their line, of course, and not abandoned it in the face of no deal as we were promised. And I have to keep coming back to these Brexiteer claims. Let us not forget that Brexit itself is not Theresa May's mess as such. That's not to say she's done the best she could. She's turned a terrible situation into a complete disaster and destroyed the UK's credibility on the global stage. But the situation began because of corruption in the media and the far right of her party. It was given form by the weakness of David Cameron, who promptly buggered off. Were it not for that, we'd be limiting our criticism of Theresa May to decimating police numbers and overseeing an increase in violent crime in the country. Now, I saw a tweet from James O'Brien today. He said, "It's a mark of how completely broken she is that Brexiters are now blaming Theresa May for the mess they caused, and nobody's feeling an iota of sympathy for her." And this, for me, is her greatest failure. The Brexiteers still have the support of other Brexiteers. Not Remainers, but they never did and never will while they hold to that position. Remainers still have the support of other Remainers, in a similar vein. But Theresa May thought she was compromising, but instead of bringing both sides together, she attacked both sides. She doesn't have the support or respect of either side because she's shafted them both. She completely ignored the people who voted to remain, who were not much less numerous than those who voted to leave and are now believed to be much more numerous. And she also did a disservice to the leavers as well. Rather than explain the realities of the situation, she kept supporting the line of the Brexiteers whose ideas of Brexit were completely impossible, legally and politically. Many people have come to this conclusion themselves now, but many more could have if she'd been honest with them from the start. She's now completely alone on her little island of hypocrisy. Instead of taking a side, she abandoned both sides. And just as she was made to wait outside the debate in Brussels yesterday, surely the day must be coming soon when the UK Parliament does the same. Wait outside, Theresa. Adults are talking now. So anyway, I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content, click the bell notification as well. And until next time, I'll see you later.